They spent 181 days frozen inside Arctic sea ice, in total isolation, in temperatures that dropped to -30 degrees Celsius, and they chose every single part of it. The channel is called Alluring Arctic Sailing, and the two people behind it, Juho Karhu and Sovi Kangasluoma, have built one of the most quietly extraordinary stories in the history of YouTube sailing. By the end of this video, you will understand why the moments that nearly ended their journey are the exact reasons they are still out there today. Juho Karhu is not who you picture when you imagine the founder of a sailing channel with 365,000 subscribers and 50 million total views. He is Finnish. He came up as a free skier, spending winters in the Alps chasing powder and living the kind of unstructured movement-first life that does not lend itself to building anything stable. He worked as a freelance games translator, not a filmmaker, not a mariner. Sailing was something he picked up in his 20s because he needed a summer activity that could sit alongside his winters on skis. He took a beginner's course. He spent a few years poking around the Baltic Sea on a small boat. Nothing about that trajectory pointed toward the Arctic. But at some point, he put two things together that most people never would: skiing and sailing. Not as separate hobbies, as a single integrated life. The mountains in northern Norway were accessible by sea. If you had a boat that could handle those waters in winter, you could reach peaks that almost nobody else reached. You could ski terrain that had never been skied. That was the actual idea. The channel came later. In 2017, he spent his first winter alone aboard a 1984 Beneteau Idyll in Finland. A fiberglass boat. Not built for polar conditions, not equipped with anything exotic, just a stock production boat that he kept afloat and lived on through a Finnish winter. Most sailors haul their boats out of the water when the cold arrives. Juho viewed winter as the beginning of something, not the end of a season. In 2018, he sailed that same boat, a vessel called Sylvia, to northern Norway. He spent 2 years there, sailing, skiing, and gradually building the documentation habit that would eventually become the Alluring Arctic YouTube channel. And if you think that foundation sounds unconventional, wait until you hear how Sovi Kangasluoma entered the story. Sovi did not grow up planning to spend winters frozen into the ice of a Greenland fjord. She came in with a completely different skill set, the kind that made the whole project more serious than it might otherwise have been. Her academic work focused on the Arctic in a precise and unusual way: the role of gender and emotions within the Arctic fossil fuel industry. That was the subject of her dissertation, which she defended at the University of Helsinki in 2023 and turned into a PhD. After that, she moved into postdoctoral research at the Arctic Center at the University of Lapland, working on questions about human relationships with ice and how those relationships are changing as Arctic conditions shift. What that means in practice aboard SV Lumi is that when Juho and Sovi visit a community during a Northwest Passage transit, Sovi is the one conducting fieldwork interviews about what ice means to the people who depend on it. She is not just crew. The channel's descriptions of the Arctic carry research weight that most sailing content simply does not have. But before any of that, before the PhD, before the Northwest Passage, before Greenland, there was an early moment that could have stopped everything. On a winter sail early in their time together, while docking Juho's boat Sylvia against icy cliffs in the Finnish archipelago, Sovi slipped. She went into the freezing water, in winter, in Finland. That is a situation that can kill you in minutes. She got out. They kept going. It is the kind of moment that either ends a relationship with the sea or permanently changes how you think about risk. For both of them, it seems to have done the latter. And here's what the comments kept asking. And here's the answer they never got, until now. To understand how close Alluring Arctic came to not existing in its current form, you have to understand what Lumi was before Juho and Sovi found her. The boat is a Garcia Nuani 43, an aluminum hull, French-built, designed specifically for high-latitude expedition sailing. It is the kind of vessel that serious polar sailors dream about. Tough hull, retractable centerboard for navigating shallow water, built to take punishment from ice. By reputation, one of the best platforms available for the kind of sailing Juho was planning. Juho and Sovi found her in California in 2022. She had been sitting in the same spot at a boatyard for 15 years. Trees were growing on her deck. She had not moved in so long that the yard around her had essentially reclaimed part of the space. The aluminum hull was sound. That was the diagnosis that made the purchase viable. But the interior was a different story. They bought her anyway. What followed was 6 months of work that Juho has described as grueling. They gutted the interior entirely, removed all through hull fittings, the fittings that, in freezing conditions, become potential failure points, where seawater meets a frozen seal and structural integrity begins to erode. Every piece of the boat that could be compromised by Arctic temperatures had to be addressed before departure. European aluminum sailboat prices had gone through the roof at that point, driven by pandemic-era demand. Finding a structurally sound aluminum expedition hull in California at a reasonable price was the kind of circumstance that doesn't repeat itself. They moved quickly, they worked hard, and when the refit was complete, they pointed the bow north from California and sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge. But the first serious test of everything they had built came much sooner than the Arctic. Most people who know this story stop here. But the real story starts right now. Before Juho ever reached Alaskan waters, before the Northwest Passage, before Greenland, Lumi nearly ended the voyage on the rocks of the Faroe Islands. This happened in 2021, before the California acquisition, when Juho was still sailing his previous aluminum boat, Arctica. The refit on that vessel had been rushed. He was determined to reach Iceland before winter, and that determination compressed the timeline in ways that were going to cost him. He made his first ocean passage on the boat from Norway to Tórshavn in the Faroe Islands, with Sovi as crew. When they motored toward an anchorage at Vestmanna on the west side of Streymoy, the engine failed. Not a minor fault, a full failure at the wrong moment. Strong tidal currents ran through that section of water. There was no wind to sail on. There was no way to anchor in the conditions. The boat was moving, and they had no propulsion. Juho issued a pan-pan call, one step below a full distress signal, and called for assistance. What happened after the immediate crisis was arguably more significant than the crisis itself. Juho, on camera, walked through the basic error that had led to the situation. He explained what went wrong, how it could have been avoided, and what the correct response should have been. No deflection, no blaming the equipment, an honest accounting of a mistake that, in slightly different conditions, could have been fatal. That video became a reference point for his audience, not because of the drama of the engine failure, but because of what he did afterward. It established the baseline for what kind of channel Alluring Arctic was going to be. Technical honesty, even when the honesty was embarrassing. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What he did instead is the part nobody talks about. In the summer of 2024, Juho and Sovi pointed Lumi east from Alaska and attempted one of the most difficult sailing routes on the planet. The Northwest Passage connects the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic through the Canadian Arctic archipelago. For most of the year it is impassable, locked under ice. There is a window, typically 4 to 6 weeks, that opens around the end of July when enough ice retreats to allow a transit. Miss that window and you are stuck. Try to push through early and you are in ice that will stop or damage your boat. The margin is thin and the charts are unreliable. In places, island positions on older charts are off by a full mile. Juho went in with thermal imaging on the mast for ice detection at night, a radar suite capable of distinguishing ice from open water in low visibility, and years of experience reading conditions that most sailors have never encountered. He also went in knowing the passage was bigger than anything they had previously attempted. His own words. They completed it, Alaska to Greenland, in one season on a boat that had been sitting in a California boatyard 3 years earlier with trees growing on the deck. That passage earned the channel the Finnish Boating Association's Media Act of the Year award in 2024, with the jury specifically citing the quality of the documentation and what it communicated about responsible Arctic seamanship. But completing the passage was only the beginning of what 2024 was going to demand from both of them. The number that came next, nobody who followed this channel expected it. After the Northwest Passage, most sailors would have pointed south for winter. Juho and Sovi chose to stay. Overwintering is a deliberate choice to let your boat freeze into the sea ice and remain through the Arctic winter, rather than sailing to warmer water before the ice locks in. It is not a survival situation by default. It is, when planned correctly, a managed commitment to spending months in extreme cold, extreme isolation, and extreme darkness with your vessel locked into ice that moves with the tides every 6 hours. Their first attempt at a winter location ran into a problem immediately. The fjord they had chosen, about 40 nautical miles from Sisimiut on Greenland's west coast, was already too frozen when they arrived in November. The ice was too thick to push through. They had to find a different spot, a smaller bay that still offered enough protection, still within theoretical reach of help, but far enough from any settlement to be genuinely alone. They found one, and they stayed. 181 days, from October 2024 through April 2025. The temperature dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. The ice shifted constantly with tidal pressure, building ridges, cracking, refreezing. Their polar bear watch system was a Greenland dog named Nova, whom they had adopted in Greenland because she was too small and too timid for a sled team and would otherwise have been put down. Nova, it turned out, preferred sleeping at their feet inside the boat to watching for bears outside on the ice. They went for daily walks. They maintained a strict routine. Sovi had mornings alone. Juho had nights alone. The ice never let them fully relax. A boat frozen into a moving surface is a boat under ongoing structural load. But they documented every part of it, including the psychological reality of what that kind of isolation actually feels like. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. While Juho and Sovi were frozen into a Greenland bay, the channel kept growing. By the time the ice broke in spring 2025 and Lumi was free again, Alluring Arctic had crossed 365,000 subscribers and accumulated more than 50 million total views. Juho had been working full-time on video production since 2020. The long-form content, not shorts, not clips, but full documentary-length episodes, was generating around 20 million unique views per year across all platforms. None of that came from viral moments or algorithm games. The channel grew because the content was unlike anything else in the sailing category. It was technically honest in a way that made it useful, not just watchable. Viewers came for the scenery, the Arctic light, the whale encounters, the ski descents off peaks that no one had documented before, and stayed because Juho treated his audience as capable of understanding the actual engineering and decision-making behind what they were watching. In 2021, the Ocean Cruising Club awarded them the Adventure Challenge grant for sailors pursuing world-class exploration objectives. In 2024, the Finnish Boating Association gave them the Media Act of the Year. In 2026, the Finnish Minister of Climate and Environment made them recipients of the same award again, noting that the channel shared not just personal adventure, but genuine knowledge about Arctic research and conditions. That same year, the Merikarhut Association awarded them the Sailor's Plaque for outstanding seamanship, specifically citing sustained skill, courage, and determination in demanding conditions. Meanwhile, Sovi completed her postdoctoral research project in 2025 and published a non-fiction book in Finnish in 2026, Sitten Purjetimme Pohjoiseen, which translates as Then We Sailed North. The English, German, and Dutch publishing rights have already been sold. She never talked about this publicly, until now. As of mid-2026, Juho and Sovi are at sea again. After the icebreak in Greenland, they completed a systems shakedown in early 2026 and are now mid-passage from Greenland toward Europe, routing through Iceland and the Faroe Islands, the same waters where that engine failure happened years earlier, back when they were sailing a different boat and Juho was still figuring out the margin between manageable risk and something worse. Nova is with them. The boat that was sitting abandoned in California with trees on the deck has now completed the Northwest Passage, survived 181 days frozen into Arctic ice, and is heading toward European waters under its own power. What comes next for the channel is not fully mapped. Juho has said publicly that the life is not primarily about the challenges, the ice, the equipment failures, the danger. It is about being present in Arctic nature, being close to it in a way that almost nobody else is. The difficulty is the cost of admission, not the point. Sovi continues her research alongside the sailing, and that combination, an Arctic academic and a technically obsessive filmmaker living on a small aluminum boat above the Arctic Circle, is why the content is consistently different from everything else in the category. One phone call, one conversation, that's all it took to change the direction of everything. Actually, in their case, it was not even that. It was a beginner sailing course taken by a skier who needed something to do in summer. That is where 50 million views, a Northwest Passage transit, 181 days in the ice, and a book deal in 4 languages began. Juho Karhu is, by his own description, a skier and adventurer first and a sailor second, and that order of priorities is exactly why Alluring Arctic became what it is. The channel was never built to be a sailing channel. It was built to get 2 people to places they wanted to be, and to document the reality of what that took, including the engine failure, the rushed refit, the ice that was already too thick when they arrived, and the 181 days they chose to stay anyway. The audience did not come because it was dramatic. They came because it was true. Going forward, watch the 2026 season as they make their way back through Icelandic and Faroese waters, the same route that tested them years ago, on a boat that is now genuinely ready for it. And watch what Sovi's book does when the English edition lands, because the story of how 2 people built a life on a research sailboat in the Arctic has an audience far beyond YouTube. Here is the question this leaves you with. Juho Karhu describes himself as a skier who sails. He built one of the most respected channels in adventure sailing, without setting out to be a sailor at all. Does the fact that he never intended this make the accomplishment more impressive? Or is the lesson that the best way to build something remarkable is to stop trying to build the thing everyone expects? Leave your answer below.